Alice and I met 8 years ago on a crisp autumn evening at a community fundraiser in Kansas City. It was one of those nights where everything felt like it was exactly how it was supposed to be. I was standing by the dessert table, debating whether I could justify a second slice of pumpkin pie, when she walked up beside me. "You're eyeing that pie like it owes you money," she said, her voice light and teasing. Caught off guard, I laughed. It might. Hard to say no to something that perfect. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a small, amused smile. "Does that line usually work?" "It's not a line," I shot back. "I'm just really passionate about pie." That was Alice, a mix of sharp wit and undeniable warmth. We spent the rest of the evening talking about everything and nothing, finding shared laughs in the smallest things. By the end of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It felt like the beginning of something I didn't dare put into words yet. Over the following weeks, we became inseparable. Coffee dates turned into long walks at Loose Park, then into hours spent dreaming about the future. Alice had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. She'd listen intently, laugh freely, and somehow always know the right thing to say. She worked in tech sales, something about accounting software, though I never fully understood it, and was already climbing the corporate ladder. I was just starting my career as a mechanical engineer, but her ambition inspired me to aim higher. We both came from deeply rooted families in the Midwest, raised with strong values of faith and community. Sundays were always reserved for church and family dinners, something we carried into our relationship without even discussing it. It just felt natural, like so many other parts of being with Alice. A year into dating, my parents surprised me with a gift I still struggle to believe: a 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Kansas City. "It's not just a house," my dad had said. "It's a place to build your life. Fill it with love, Luke." I took those words to heart. Soon after, Alice and I got engaged, and 6 months later, we were standing in front of our friends and family, exchanging vows in a little white church that looked straight out of a storybook. I'll never forget the way she looked that day, her eyes shining with tears as she promised me forever. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered as we shared our first dance. "With you? Always," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Married life came easily to us. Our routines blended effortlessly, and we built a home filled with laughter and quiet moments of connection. Alice was naturally affectionate, the kind of woman who'd rest her head on my shoulder while we watched TV or slip handwritten notes into my lunch bag with silly little messages like, "Don't forget, I love you more than coffee." Our intimate life was equally fulfilling. Alice had this way of making even the simplest moments feel meaningful. She'd surprise me when I least expected it, like the time she turned a quiet Tuesday night into a romantic dinner with candles and my favorite dish. She was thoughtful, attentive, and always made me feel like the luckiest man alive. 2 years into our marriage, our joy doubled when we welcomed twin boys, Jack and Noah. They were perfect. I remember holding them for the first time, feeling this overwhelming mix of fear and love. Alice and I became a team, navigating sleepless nights and chaotic days with an unspoken understanding. Parenting was exhausting, but we tackled it together. Watching her with the boys made me fall in love with her all over again. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Fridays were date nights, usually a cozy dinner at Bella Napoli, our favorite Italian spot in Kansas City. Saturdays were for family adventures, whether it was a trip to the zoo or a simple afternoon at the park. Sundays were sacred, a time for church and big family meals. Alice was never one to follow trends or chase after flashy things. She preferred simplicity, classic dresses, understated jewelry, and a lifestyle that focused on what truly mattered. She was grounded in every sense of the word, and I admired that about her. For 5 years, everything felt perfect. Sure, raising twins tested our patience, and work sometimes pulled us in different directions, but we always found our way back to each other. We communicated, we laughed, we leaned on each other. Our bond felt unshakable, until the night her phone rang. It was a chilly Thursday evening. We just finished putting the boys to bed when Alice's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting as she answered. "Hey, David," she said, her voice polite but hesitant. "What's going on?" David was her boss, someone she occasionally mentioned but never in great detail. I didn't think much of it until she hung up and turned to me, looking uneasy. "They need me to go to Dallas next week for the annual tech conference," she said, fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "Some of the team is out sick, and David says I'm the only one who can fill in. Can't someone else go?" I asked, not thrilled at the idea of her being away for 3 days. "I tried to say no," she admitted, sighing. "But he was insistent. I/you 2019 am sorry, Luke. I hate leaving you and the boys." I forced a smile, trying to hide my disappointment. "It's okay. We'll manage. Just do what you need to do." That weekend, I helped her pack, making sure she had everything she needed. As the black car her company had arranged pulled into the driveway, she turned to me, her eyes soft and full of emotion. "I'll call you every night," she promised. "I already miss you." "We'll miss you too," I said, hugging her tightly before she climbed into the car. As I watched it drive away, a strange feeling settled in my chest. I told myself it was just the weight of missing her, the way I always did when she traveled. But deep down, something didn't feel quite right. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. The first night without Alice was suffocating in its silence. The boys were finally asleep after their usual protests, Jack insisting he wasn't tired and Noah pretending to hide under his blanket while giggling uncontrollably. The chaos had momentarily distracted me, but as the quiet settled, the emptiness in the house became deafening. I sat on the couch, beer in hand, flipping mindlessly through the channels. I wasn't really watching, just trying to fill the space with noise. Every so often, I'd glance at my phone, hoping Alice would call. When it finally buzzed, I answered almost too quickly. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice warm but a little tired. "How are my 3 favorite boys?" "We're good," I said, settling into the comfort of her voice. Jack wore himself out with his toy cars, and Noah spent 10 minutes trying to convince me he didn't need a bath. But we survived. She laughed softly, and for a moment, it felt like everything was normal. "I miss you already," she said, her tone quieter now. "It's weird being away." "We miss you too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How's the conference?" "It's good," she said, but there was something rushed in her tone, like she was eager to move past the question. "Busy, but good. Lots of client meetings. I'll be glad when it's over." "Don't overwork yourself," I said. "Just get through it and come home." "I will," she promised. "Love you." "Love you too." When the call ended, I stared at the blank screen for a moment, letting the quiet creep back in. Something about the way she spoke felt different. Her words were affectionate, but there was a distance in her tone I couldn't quite place. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things. She was just tired. That's all it was. The next day passed in a blur of diapers, toy trains, and peanut butter sandwiches. The boys kept me busy, their energy relentless, but the hours between their naps and bedtime felt heavier than usual. I told myself I was just missing her more than I expected. It had been years since she traveled for work, and the house felt incomplete without her. That evening, as I was cleaning up dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Mike, a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in months. His message was casual, but it hit me like a punch to the chest. "Hey, Luke, you at the Dallas conference too?" Confused, I replied, "No, why?" "I think I saw Alice at the hotel bar last night," he wrote back. "She was with some guy. Thought it might have been you." Some guy. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Before I could respond, another message came through, a photo. I opened it, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was Alice. She was sitting at a bar, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless in a way she rarely bothered with at home. She was wearing a sleek black dress I'd never seen before, one that hugged her figure and dipped lower at the neckline than anything she usually wore. Beside her sat David, her boss, leaning in close with his arm resting casually on the back of her chair. They were both smiling, caught mid-conversation. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. This wasn't Alice. At least, not the Alice I knew. She hated dressing up for work events. She avoided heels because she said they made her feet ache. And yet, here she was, looking like someone I didn't recognize. Did you talk to her? I finally typed back. No, Mike replied. Didn't want to interrupt. Just thought you should know. I thanked him, but the words felt hollow. That night, when Alice called, I tried to keep my voice steady, but my thoughts were a storm. Hey, love, she said brightly. How are you? Good, I lied. The boys are good too. Jack built a fort out of every blanket in the house. She laughed, and for a moment, I almost believed everything was fine. Sounds like him. I miss you guys so much. We miss you too, I said. How's the conference? It's fine, she replied quickly. Busy. I had a dinner meeting with David and some clients tonight. Just got back to my room. My chest tightened at the mention of David, but I forced myself to stay calm. Get some rest, I said. We'll see you soon. Love you, she said softly. Love you too. After we hung up, I sat there in the dark, the photo Mike sent burned into my mind. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe her words, but the doubts were louder now, impossible to ignore. Why hadn't she mentioned the dress? The bar? Why did she sound so rehearsed, so careful? The next morning, another message from Mike. Saw them again last night. This time walking into the hotel lobby together. Want me to send it? I hesitated before replying. Yeah, send it. The photo came through moments later. Alice and David, side by side, walking close enough for their arms to brush. Her smile was easy, warm, and completely unlike the exhausted tone she'd used with me the night before. My stomach turned as I stared at the image. This wasn't work. It couldn't be. When Alice called that evening, I tried to listen, but her words felt like static. Just one more day, she said cheerfully. I can't wait to come home to you and the boys. We can't wait either, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The Alice I knew, the Alice I loved, was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to hold on. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a single thought kept repeating in my mind. What if I don't know her at all? Alice returned home the following evening, just as she promised. The boys squealed with excitement when she walked through the door, racing toward her with outstretched arms. She dropped her bags and scooped them up, covering their faces with kisses as they giggled uncontrollably. I missed you two so much, she said, her voice bright and full of love. Did you behave for Daddy? They were perfect, I said, forcing a smile. Welcome home. She looked at me then, her smile softening. I missed you too. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around my waist and leaning in for a kiss. Her perfume was different, something subtle yet unfamiliar. I kissed her back, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the photos Mike had sent. I couldn't shake the image of her with David, the way she smiled at him, the way she looked so at ease in his presence. That night, after the boys were asleep, we sat together on the couch. Alice rested her head on my shoulder, her fingers tracing small circles on my arm. It was a gesture that used to make me feel grounded, loved. But now, it felt hollow. How was the trip? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Good, she said. Busy, but productive. I think we landed a few new clients. That's great, I said. David must be thrilled. She paused for a fraction of a second. So brief, I might not have noticed if I hadn't been paying attention. Yeah, he was happy with how everything went. Did you guys get much downtime? I asked, testing the waters. Mike said he saw you at the bar one night. Her head lifted slightly from my shoulder. Mike? As in your old coworker Mike? Yeah, I said, keeping my voice even. He was at a different conference in Dallas. Said he spotted you with David. Her hand stilled on my arm, her body going tense. Oh, right. We went to the hotel bar after dinner one night. Just for a quick drink. Nothing crazy. I nodded, watching her carefully. That's nice. He mentioned you looked great. Said you were dressed to the nines. She let out a small laugh, but it sounded forced. Well, it was a work event. I had to look presentable. I didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, I changed the subject, letting her think the moment had passed. But as the night wore on, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next day, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I debated what to do. I'd never been the kind of person to invade someone's privacy, especially not Alice's. But the doubts swirling in my mind were suffocating. I needed answers. After a moment of hesitation, I pulled up our shared phone account and began scrolling through the call logs. My heart sank when I saw David's name pop up repeatedly over the past few weeks, late-night calls, sometimes lasting over an hour. There were also several text messages, though I couldn't see the content. I sat there, staring at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't just the calls. It was the timing. She told me she was working late or catching up on emails, but instead, she'd been talking to him. My mind raced, replaying every interaction we'd had over the past month. The subtle shifts in her behavior, the moments where she seemed distracted or distant, they all started to make sense. I wanted to confront her immediately, but I knew I needed more. If I was wrong, if this was all just some innocent misunderstanding, I couldn't risk accusing her without proof. Over the next few days, I kept my suspicions to myself, watching her more closely than ever. She seemed like the same Alice I'd always known, loving, attentive, devoted to the boys. But now, every kind gesture, every affectionate word, felt tainted by the doubt festering in my mind. One evening, after the boys were in bed, I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen out of habit. It was a message from David. Can't stop thinking about last night. You looked amazing. When can I see you again? My heart stopped. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Last night? She'd been home with me, or so I thought. But now, I wasn't sure what to believe. The words on the screen blurred as a wave of nausea rolled over me. When Alice came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Everything okay? She asked, towel drying her hair. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. Yeah, just tired. She nodded, climbing into bed beside me. As she leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. My mind was too consumed with the message, the implications of what it meant. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with David, laughing, smiling, looking at him the way she used to look at me. The doubts that had been gnawing at me for days were no longer just doubts. They were something far worse. The next morning, I called Mike. My voice was shaky as I explained what I'd seen, what I suspected. Look, he said, his tone serious. You need to know for sure. Do you want me to keep an eye on her? I don't mind. I hesitated, torn between my need for answers and the guilt of spying on my own wife. But in the end, the need for the truth won out. Yeah, I said quietly. Keep me posted. Over the next week, Mike sent me photos, videos, and updates. Each one felt like a knife to the chest. There was Alice, sitting too close to David at a restaurant. There she was again, walking into a hotel with him late at night. And then, the video. A brief clip of her leaning in to kiss him in the dim light of the lobby. I watched it in stunned silence, my body numb. It was undeniable now. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, was lying to me. When she came home that evening, she greeted me with a kiss, her smile warm and genuine. But all I could think about was the video, the way she'd kissed David like he was the center of her world. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I played along, pretending everything was fine. How was your day? She asked, wrapping her arms around me. Good, I said, forcing a smile. How about yours? Busy, she replied, but good. I'm just glad to be home. Her words felt like poison, sweet on the surface but deadly underneath. As she walked away, my fists clenched at my sides. I knew I couldn't keep pretending for much longer. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The days that followed were unbearable. Every smile Alice gave me, every kiss goodnight, felt like a cruel reminder of the woman she used to be, or maybe the woman I had imagined her to be. I couldn't look at her without seeing the images Mike had sent, without hearing David's name echo in my head. One evening, after the boys were asleep, I decided I couldn't keep it in any longer. I had to confront her. I needed to hear her say it. to see if she would lie to my face or crumble under the weight of the truth. "Alice," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We were sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on her face. "Can we talk?" She looked up from her book, her expression immediately shifting to concern. "Of course. What's wrong?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. No excuses. Just the truth." Her brow furrowed, and she set the book down. "You're scaring me, Luke. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. "Are you having an affair with David?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. Then she let out a short, nervous laugh. "What?" she said, her voice shaking slightly. "No, of course not. Where is this coming from?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Don't lie to me, Alice. I know about the late-night calls. I know about the dinners. And I've seen the photos." Her face paled, and she sat back, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "Photos?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mike saw you," I said, my voice cracking. "He saw you with David at the hotel bar. He sent me pictures of you two together, Alice. I know you've been meeting him. I know about the kiss in the lobby." Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. She looked away, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. Finally, she said, "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Then tell me, Alice, what is it? What am I supposed to think when I see you kissing another man? When I see you smiling at him like he's the one who makes you happy?" "It was a mistake," she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "It didn't mean anything. I swear. Luke, I love you. I love our family. It was just a stupid, meaningless mistake." I stared at her, my heart aching at the sight of her tears. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it was just one mistake, one moment of weakness. But deep down, I knew better. "How long has it been going on?" I asked, my voice cold. She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "Luke, please." "How long, Alice?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Don't lie to me." 3 months, she whispered, her voice breaking. "It started 3 months ago, but it didn't mean anything. I swear, it's over now." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. 3 months. While I was putting the boys to bed, making dinner, and folding laundry, she had been with him. While I was telling her I loved her, she had been giving her love to someone else. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why would you do this to us?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking. I felt lost. David paid attention to me in a way that made me feel special, and I got caught up in it. But it was a mistake, Luke. I realize that now. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I stood up, pacing the room as anger and heartbreak warred inside me. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice trembling. "You felt lost? Alice, we have a family. We have 2 little boys who look up to you, who adore you. And you threw it all away for what? For some attention?" "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I hate myself for what I've done. Please, Luke, give me a chance to make this right. I'll do anything." I stopped pacing, staring at her as she sat there, broken and pleading. A part of me wanted to forgive her, to hold her and tell her we could work through this. But another part of me, the part that had seen the photos, heard the lies, and felt the sting of betrayal, couldn't let it go. "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my voice raw. "I don't know if I can look at you the same way again." Her sobs grew louder, and she fell to her knees, clutching my hands. "Please, Luke, don't give up on us. Don't give up on our family." I pulled my hands away, the pain too much to bear. "I need time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to think." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I walked out of the room, leaving her there, sobbing on the floor. As I closed the door to our bedroom, I leaned against it, my chest heaving with the weight of everything that had just happened. For years, Alice had been my safe place, my partner, my everything. And now, she felt like a stranger who had shattered the life we had built together. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a single question repeated in my mind. Can we ever come back from this? The morning after Alice's confession, I woke up to the sound of Jack and Noah laughing in their room. Their voices were a bright contrast to the heavy silence in my heart. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could rewind time. Back to when everything felt simple, back to when I didn't have to question the woman lying next to me. But there was no going back. The truth was out, and it hung in the air between Alice and me, suffocating and inescapable. When I finally got up, the boys ran to greet me, their small arms wrapping tightly around my legs. "Daddy," Jack exclaimed, grinning up at me. "We're building a spaceship. Want to help?" I forced a smile, kneeling down to ruffle his hair. "Of course, buddy. Let me grab some coffee first, and I'm all yours." As I headed to the kitchen, I found Alice standing by the counter, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than any words could have been. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral as I poured myself a cup of coffee. She hesitated, like she wanted to say more, but I turned and walked back to the boys before she could. I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. Not after the sleepless night I'd spent replaying her words, trying to make sense of the senseless. That afternoon, as the boys napped, I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone. Mike's message sat at the top of my inbox, untouched since he'd sent it. I hadn't been able to bring myself to open it yet. I already knew what I would find. More photos, more evidence of Alice's betrayal, more proof of the life she kept hidden from me. Finally, I couldn't avoid it any longer. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I tapped the message, opening the file he'd sent. The first photo was of Alice and David at a restaurant. They were sitting close, their heads tilted toward each other, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Her smile was warm, familiar, the same smile she used to give me. I scrolled to the next photo. It was them again, this time walking into a hotel together. David's hand brushed against her lower back, and she didn't pull away. The sight of it made my stomach turn. And then the messages. "You looked beautiful today. I couldn't stop staring. Wish I could see you again tonight. Counting the hours until tomorrow." I slammed my phone down on the coffee table, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't some fleeting mistake. It was a relationship, a connection, and she had given it to someone else. When Alice came downstairs later, she found me sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. She hesitated in the doorway, her expression cautious. "Look," she said softly, "can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. My chest felt heavy, like there was a weight pressing down on it, making it hard to breathe. Finally, I looked up at her, my eyes meeting hers. "What do you want me to say, Alice?" I asked, my voice flat. "That it's okay? That I understand?" "Because I don't." Tears filled her eyes, and she took a hesitant step closer. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken your trust, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You keep saying that. But how do you fix this, Alice? How do you fix months of lies? How do you fix what you've destroyed?" She flinched, her hands twisting in front of her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try. I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what you need." I stared at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and sorrow. "What I need," I said slowly, "is for this to have never happened. But you can't give me that, can you?" Her tears spilled over, and she shook her head. "No," she whispered, "I can't. But I can try to be better. I can try to prove to you that I still love you, that I still love our family." "Love?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "You don't get to say that, Alice. Love doesn't do this. Love doesn't destroy everything it touches." She broke down then, sobbing so hard that her whole body shook. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to reach out and hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't, because I wasn't sure if it would. That night, as Alice cried herself to sleep in our bedroom, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone. The photos and messages Mike had sent replayed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I poured myself a drink, the whiskey burning my throat, but doing nothing to numb the pain. I thought about our boys, about the life we had built together, about the promises we had made. I thought about the Alice I had fallen in love with, the Alice who had once been my partner, my best friend, my everything. And I wondered if that Alice was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the lies and mistakes. But then I thought about David, the man who had taken what wasn't his to take, the man who had pursued my wife, knowing she was married, knowing she had a family. And I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd ever felt before. This wasn't just about Alice anymore. This was about him, too. The next morning, I called Mike. My voice was steady, but there was a coldness in it that I barely recognized. "I need your help," I said. "Anything," he replied. "What do you need?" "David," I said, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "I need to know everything about him, his schedule, his habits, the places he goes. I want to know exactly who he is." Mike hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Luke? What are you planning to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I can't just sit here anymore. I need to do something." "All right," he said. "I'll start digging." When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in days, I wasn't just reacting. I was taking control. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let it destroy me. Alice had made her choices. David had made his. And now, it was time for me to make mine. The morning after Alice's tearful plea, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window as the boys chased each other around the yard. Their laughter cut through the heaviness in my chest, momentarily reminding me of what was still good in my life. They didn't understand what was happening, and for that, I was grateful. But their innocence also made it harder. I couldn't let my anger and heartbreak ruin their childhoods. I had to keep it together, even if I didn't know how much longer I could. Alice walked into the kitchen, hesitating when she saw me. She was holding a cup of tea, her movements careful, almost timid, as if she were afraid of breaking the fragile truce between us. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, my tone flat. She lingered by the counter, watching me. "The boys seem happy," she said, nodding toward the window. "They are," I said, keeping my eyes on them. "They don't know any better." Her shoulders sagged, and she set the mug down. "Luke, I know I've said this 100 times, but I am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how much I mean it." I turned to look at her, my chest tightening. "You're right, it doesn't fix anything. Saying sorry doesn't erase what you did." "I know," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe you can't," I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't leave. Instead, she stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I want to fight for us, Luke. For the boys. For everything we've built. Please, tell me how to start." I stared at her, searching her face for something. Remorse, sincerity, anything that might make me believe her. "I don't have an answer for you," I said finally. "All I know is that I don't trust you anymore. And without trust, what's left?" She flinched, her tears falling freely now. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Anything to earn that trust back." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned back to the window, watching the boys as they played. Their laughter felt like a lifeline, a reminder of why I couldn't let this break me completely. Later that afternoon, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I found myself driving toward the coffee shop Mike had mentioned in his email. I hadn't planned on going. It wasn't part of any grand strategy, but I couldn't shake the need to see him, to put a face to the man who had so easily stepped into my life and taken what wasn't his. When I arrived, I parked across the street and waited. The minutes dragged on, each one filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. And then, There he was. David. He looked exactly how I'd imagined. Tall, clean-cut, exuding a confidence that made my stomach churn. He walked into the coffee shop, ordered his drink, and scrolled through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to get out, to confront him, to demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from weeks of anger and heartbreak, held me back. When he left the coffee shop, I stepped out of my car, my heart pounding. He didn't notice me. He walked to his car, completely oblivious to my presence. I stood there, watching as he drove away, feeling a strange mix of frustration and relief. What would confronting him have accomplished, anyway? Would it have made me feel better? Or would it have just poured fuel on an already raging fire? That evening, Alice and I sat in silence on opposite ends of the couch. The boys were asleep, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I could feel her watching me, but I didn't meet her gaze. Finally, I broke the silence. I saw him today. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. David. I nodded. At the coffee shop. Her hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. Did you talk to him? No, I said simply. I just needed to see him. She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, my voice heavy, but I needed to put a face to the name. To see the man who thought it was okay to walk into my life and take what wasn't his. Her eyes filled with tears, and she leaned forward, her voice trembling. Luke, please, don't do anything you'll regret. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Regret? Alice, do you even understand what regret feels like? Every day, I regret trusting you. I regret believing in you. I regret loving you. She flinched, her tears spilling over as she covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. For the first time that night, I didn't feel anger or sadness or even pity. I felt nothing. And maybe that was the worst feeling of all. The next day, Alice approached me as I was cleaning up the backyard. The boys were playing in the sandbox, their laughter ringing out like a bomb against the silence between us. Luke, she said, her voice hesitant, can we talk? I sighed, setting the rake aside. What is it, Alice? She stepped closer, her eyes red and swollen. I know you're tired of hearing this, but I need you to know I'm not giving up on us. I'm not giving up on you. I stared at her, my chest tightening. And what does that even mean? I asked, my voice raw. That you're sorry? That you'll try harder? Words don't mean anything, Alice. Not anymore. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't back down. Then I'll show you, she said. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with, that I'm still the mother our boys deserve. I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again. You keep saying that, but how do you prove something like this? How do you fix the fact that I can't even look at you without seeing him? Her sobs broke through then, and she covered her face with her hands. I don't know, she admitted, but I'll try. For you. For us. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned back to the boys, watching as they dug tunnels in the sand. Their laughter was the only thing keeping me grounded. Without them, I wasn't sure I'd have anything left to hold on to.